I'll make this quick because many of you know what I'm talking about. In less than 2 months, the event of the year will be happening in Lockhart, Texas. It's the Renegade University Weekend in Texas at Buck Johnson's house, the host of the Counterflow podcast. We will have Hotep Jesus, Scott Horton, Cody Wilson, Deirdre McCluskey, and Jack the Perfume Nationalist joining me and Buck in the barbecue capital of the Longhorn State. So, get your tickets now. Time is of the essence. Go to renegadeuniversity.com/Texas, and I can't wait to see you there. Thanks to Headspace for supporting Unregistered. I've been using Headspace for almost 7 years now, and it has changed my life every single day. For a free 1-month trial, the same one that started me on Headspace, go to headspace.com/renegade. This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. The American left has never been as powerful in American life as it is now. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who spent their careers locking up poor people in prison and running wars in the Middle East, now sound like social justice warriors on college campuses. I was very fortunate to be on Buck Johnson's wonderful Counterflow podcast to talk about the history of the American left and my history with it. This is my interview with Buck Johnson on the Counterflow podcast.
He's back once again, my friend Thaddeus Russell. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, my friend, my love, Buck. I have the biggest man crush on you. What can I tell you?
Well, that gets us right into being a progressive. Here we go. No.
It's the gay agenda,
right?
Like we're both straight, but we always talk about having sex with each other. That's really weird. So anyway, sorry, that's derailing. You continue.
No, that sounds like me just hanging out, talking, having a drink. That's my humor. Well, how are you out there in mask land? What's going on anyway with all of the lockdowns, mask stuff? You're in the Bay Area. What is it like right now?
Well, let's see. Today at noon, I spent an hour doing a boxing workout with a mask on.
Oh God. Okay.
Yes, sir. Because my gym, as all businesses requires it. As all businesses do. They require it now by state mandate. So they don't require the vaccine as in New York City, but they do require masks indoors. So every store you go into, you have to wear a mask now. It's I mean, your audience is with me on this, I'm sure, but yeah, it's I don't know what to do, man. It's just like so. And then the most horrifying thing is that what you see now mostly is children being masked without the parents being masked, and then this big rush to get the vaccine into the kids, but you just see kids in masks like playing on playgrounds. And you know what the thing is? At first, my first instinct is, that's fucking child abuse. What the fuck are you doing to your kid? How dare you do that to your kid? But you know what? I've watched these kids and it kind of looks like, and this is the most terrifying thing, it kind of looks like they kind of like it.
Yeah.
And my guess is, if they do, well, it's like being cool and being good and being virtuous. You know, that's what wearing the mask is, right? To them. It's like wearing a cape. It's like it's showing you're a good person. It's like being the good guy. So I'm sure a bunch of kids have internalized that and are now going to be even more compliant when the state comes knocking on the door, maybe to send them to war or something.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's an interesting way to hide too, which a lot of kids being so new to kind of social situations, maybe it feels more comfortable. The sad thing is if they kind of grow up using things like that as a crutch, and then it's time to remove the mask in a few years, whenever that may be. There's awkward, there's already barriers to young people interacting with each other because of social media apps, and they feel like that's their way of communicating is scrolling on this phone. They get in person and they're very awkward. So if it's going to make that even worse than it already is, it's going to be an
good point about good point about them wanting to hide. And you're also right that it's encouraging this very, very self-destructive behavior. It's self-destructive to hide. You have to show yourself. You have to be in public. I mean, you have to, and that's what being a kid is. You have to learn to be in public, basically. So yeah, it's a hot mess. It's terrible. I mean, the anger has receded a bit for me, just because we can still do most things here, but it's really being replaced by despair. A deep sadness. It's this is my hometown, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. It's an amazing place. Like, if you replace the fucking people, which if I were a dictator, I would tomorrow, I'd force march half these motherfuckers into the desert. But but I'm not a dictator, so I won't do that. But yeah, I mean, and so it's just really tragic for me. It's just a tragedy that it is dominated by these absolute fucking lunatics who, like, even like among Americans, they're weird. Like, they're, California, the Bay Area, even within California, we're weird. I mean, we have red counties, totally red. We have super Trump counties in California, right? Yeah, I mean, even compared to LA, like, this place is bizarre. It's even more like progressive, nutty, Maoist bullshit. I mean, it's really something, and it's the state religion here. It's the culture. There
was a bar I was following in Oakland. I hadn't ever been there, but as you and probably a lot of my listeners know, I was going to Oakland on a yearly basis every year for the last couple of decades for football stuff. But the bar, it looked cool, so I started following them. They just the other day put up a thing on Instagram. We will now require proof of vaccination to enter the bar. So I unfollowed them. And it was before I did, I looked down and there was several kind of things like that. But there was some pushback too, like, peace out, see you guys, this is ridiculous. So kind of interesting to see some of that.
So the thing is, I'm in Oakland. So Oakland is actually probably the best part of the immediate Bay Area in this regard, because Oakland's got, here's the thing, everybody, listen to this. It's because Oakland is way less PC or woke, whatever you want to call it, than Berkeley, San Francisco, Marin, even Walnut Creek, other San Jose, because of this, it is largely a working class city. Yeah, take that and fucking smoke it in your fucking pipe, leftists. It's a working class city. Oh, not only that, motherfuckers, it is a Black and Latino working class city. And the Black and Latino working class people who live in my neighborhood, and I live on the edge of East Oakland, basically. All of East Oakland is Black and Latino. Lots of immigrants too. I don't give a fuck about any of this shit. You do not see Black Lives Matter posters in their goddamn windows. You do not see them wearing BLM t-shirts. You do not see them, like, doing any of that bullshit. They're not into that. And mask compliance among them, it's a joke. It's a joke. I mean, it's something like 20% or something like that, 30%, especially now, and I'm talking about the working class people. I'm talking about, like, the University of California professors, the African-American studies professors. I'm talking about people who live in East Oakland in the hood, the real hood. They don't wear fucking masks. Are you crazy? Like, they know better. I mean, it's really something. Yeah.
That's a good segue. We're talking about, so you have a course coming up at Renegade University. I believe it's called The History of the American Left. And I'm stoked to take this class and to do this interview about it, because it's a subject I need to know more about. And I think it's human nature to kind of shy away from stuff that you don't like. And I don't love the American left, as
It's so weird.
And I can't just take the course from Daniel McCarthy on conservatism or anything that's just stuff I kind of already know and like and want to hear an echo chamber. I need to branch out and learn about the left. And I've been learning about them already, just studying for this interview. So, you have to know your enemy. Before we get to, I actually want to ask you about your past. So those that don't know you or know of your past will figure out exactly why you know a lot about this subject. But first, what will this course entail? Kind of give a broad overview of it in general.
I'm going to do the whole sweep. We're going to meet 4 times over 4 weeks, 2 to 2.5 hours each session. So I will be able to take you all the way through from the beginning of what is considered to be the American left to the current day. So most people consider the American left to begin with the abolitionist movement and the original suffrage movement, the original feminist movement of the 1830s and 40s, before the Civil War, right? Before then, there's not really anything you can identify as a social movement that is consistent with later left-wing movements, right? But the abolitionists, still to this day, like John Brown is still like one of the major icons in the American left, right? The idea of white people sacrificing themselves to save Black people and to uplift and remake Black people, which was part of, abolitionism. That's still what leftists are doing to this day. I mean, that's still the dominant motif here, is like white people like flagellating themselves or doing, going out of their way to help to uplift the Black people, and by the way, to assimilate them into our culture and into our institutions. That's the part they don't tell you about, right? So yeah, it begins there, and then of course that the original feminist movement, the early suffrage movement, comes out of the abolitionist movement, and that's obviously part of the American left to the present day. So we start there, and you'll see immediately a lot of the antecedents, of what we're dealing with today. Which now, by the way, the left, there is an argument to be made that this is the most dominant in American culture that the American left has ever been right now. The only other time that's comparable at all would be either during World War I or the 1930s. So during World War I, and this is kind of skipping ahead to another section of the course, during World War I, Eugene Debs was the head of the Socialist Party of America, and my great-grandparents, were members of the SP, and my great-grandfather campaigned for Eugene Debs when he was running for president on the Socialist Party ticket, which he did 5 times. And Eugene Debs in 1920, they put him in prison, Buck, for simply speaking against the war. This was the Sedition Act, 1918, 1919. Yeah. And he was put in prison. He did 2 years in the federal penitentiary in Atlanta. And Eugene Debs in 1920, from his prison cell, ran for president of the United States, and he got 1 million votes. So that was a high tide for the American left. The second one would be the 1930s, when you have the ascendancy of the Communist Party USA, which was officially aligned with the Soviet Union and had a tremendous amount of influence. The number of members of the CP USA during the 1930s, probably, we don't know for sure, probably got to about 200 or 300,000 people. But they had probably 1 million people in this country who were considered to be fellow travelers, meaning they spoke the CP line on almost everything, right? But they weren't formally members. So that's pretty influential. Again, you're up to about 1 million, okay, in both cases. And this is early 20th century. So, that's probably the equivalent of like 2 or 3 million people today. Mm-hmm. That's significant. Clearly never even close to a majority, though, right? That's the thing. Never a majority, not even close. The CP and SP never had anywhere near a majority, The Democrats and Republicans were never threatened by them, really. So today, look around. I mean, the Democratic Party was not really of the American left. People on the radical left always good leftists know that Democrats are not leftists. This is one thing people need to disabuse themselves of. Yes. The Democratic Party, historically though, historically they were not part of the left. In fact, they were anti-left. Now, what's going on now with the Democratic Party? It looks like there might be, it's not happened yet, right? But it's getting close. And if they pass this infrastructure bill, which is basically smuggling in the Green New Deal, And just the fact that it passed the Senate today, and I guess it's going to pass. I guess we got it. I guess they're going to do it, right? So that's big, because that is the Bernie Sanders AOC Ilhan Omar wing of the Democratic Party, which is indisputably left.
Okay.
Those people are outright socialists. They are explicitly socialist. They say they identify as socialists. So let me tell you this: before this current Congress, or last two Congresses, before AOC came along, Bernie Sanders was the only congressperson for decades who identified as a socialist. And he was just in the House for most of that time. Bernie was only a senator for like a slight portion of his career.
Mm-hmm.
So socialism, man, and you would watch CBS, NBC, ABC News, they would never mention the word socialism. PBS wouldn't mention the word. The New York Times didn't talk about socialism. MSNBC didn't exist. And if it did, it wouldn't have mentioned socialism. Now they're all talking about socialism. Like half the Democratic Party seems to be talking about socialism openly, explicitly, and calling for it. And then passing goddamn legislation, which is highly socialistic. A massive infrastructure bill. How many trillions of dollars? Okay, what does this mean? This means people working directly for the federal government, digging ditches and laying concrete. That's classic economic collectivism. Both fascism and communism regimes did just that. Doesn't mean it in itself is fascist or communist, but it's a hell of a basis. It's a hell of a basis for communism. So, yeah, I think this might be the highest tide of the American left right now. They're reliving it. This might be their moment. And if you look at the cultural institutions, if you look at the media and the academy, Hollywood, they're more left-wing than ever. In weird ways, but they are. So we're going to trace the antecedents of this moment, which for your audience is a horrifying moment. For me, it's pretty horrifying. And yeah, it begins with abolitionism. It goes through the civil rights. It goes through the suffrage movement, and then we're going to go to the big moment for a lot of you. And it is the moment in this history is progressivism, which, people have argued whether or not it's part of the left, but they were for the original progressives. And I'm talking about the turn of the 20th century. So basically from the 1880s to the 1920s is what we call the progressive era. Yeah. This is when these people became ascendant. This was intellectuals mostly, some political leaders, but mostly just egghead fucking professors, right? Who had all these ideas about how to organize society. And this was the watchword. They wanted to create a well-organized society. Yeah. Or a well-ordered society, or a socially engineered society. Those were the words they actually used, right? And they called for mass expropriation of property and the seizure of mass industries by governments, right? So they didn't call for outright socialism, no, but they called for very socialistic policies. They also got into human engineering through eugenics, yes. which socialists and communists loved back in the day because that makes it easier to order society, to engineer people, right? That's what they were about. That's primarily, I believe, what they've always been about. And progressivism, this is the moment, everybody, God damn it. From 1880 to 1920, roughly, they took charge of the culture and they infiltrated the universities first. Mm. So progressives flooded into the universities during that time. They basically created the modern universities. And the modern, all the professions, all the licensing, firefighting is one of them. Academia was, the American Medical Association was a progressive thing. Like all the associations that basically act as a gatekeeper to the professions. That was an entirely progressive movement. It was just like they just created everything we all hate, like you and me and your audience. This is it. This is the moment. The socialists and the communists, they really didn't have that much influence, but the progressives very much did. So we're going to spend a whole lot of time on them because that's the most important moment in American history, not just the American left history. To me, that is the turning point. And they end up being responsible for what? World Wars I and II and Korea and Vietnam and, yes, Iraq, because that's who the neocons were. The neocons are descendants of progressives.
Right.
So you got to do the progressive movement. We're going to do it really well. And then do the modern era, meaning the post-World War II era. So we're going to look at the civil rights movement, of course, and then more importantly, the Black radical movement, which was different, very different from the CRM, we call it. but they were, they were connected in some way. So we spent a lot of time on Malcolm X, who to me is like maybe the greatest analyst of what we call race relations in this country, actually. And boy, would we benefit from Malcolm's presence today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. He's considered a member of the left, but he was the de facto leader of the Nation of Islam.
Right.
And the Nation of Islam is a conservative Muslim organization. So like they are all about the nuclear family, yes, and all about women cooking and cleaning, and the dad and having children, and the dad and the husband working and making money. And they're all about business and capitalism. That's what the Nation of Islam has always been about. It's about Black people making their own businesses so they can make their own wealth and have their own property, which results in having more power.
Yes.
Which is something that every libertarian can vibe with very hard, right? So it's interesting. Malcolm, why is he on the left? We'll talk about that. Like, does he belong there? The reason they put him on the left was that he was a tremendous force against racism. But the thing was, Malcolm actually chopped down the tree of American racial liberalism. He went after that ideology. My whole critique of racial liberalism, which we'll talk about a lot, really a lot of it's borrowed from Malcolm. I mean, he said, look, civil rights leaders, you know what they want? They want assimilation. Mm-hmm. They want to be like the white man. They want to please the white man. This is what he said, right? Fuck, he's like, without saying fuck, he's like, fuck that. We should make our own institutions. We should have our own businesses, our own housing, our own families, right? And you saw the disintegration of the Black family at this time too, in the 1960s is what we're talking about, right? And they're talking about the Black family, right? And they're talking about getting rid of drug abuse and drinking and alcoholism and all the rest of it, that goes on in the hood. So yeah, and then they have the Black Panthers, who are a really mixed bag from a libertarian perspective. So what did the Black Panthers first do? What was the first thing they did? They went on patrol right here in my neighborhood, right here, East Oakland and West Oakland. They went on patrol with what? Rifles and shotguns over their shoulders, looking for cops who were pulling people over. And when they saw a cop pulling someone over, they would just walk up to the cop and watch with their guns over their shoulders. Just watch on patrol against police brutality. The Oakland PD at that time was 100% white and probably at least 50% outright racist. So there was a whole bunch of police brutality right here. And the Panthers almost put an end to that. So they went to the state capitol, Sacramento, and with their guns, they walked right into the state capitol. And Ronald Reagan, a few weeks later, passed the very first gun control bill in the country against the Black Panthers. Gun control has always been racist.
Yes.
And that's just one example of how it's been always racist. And the Second Amendment has always been a friend to Black people in this country. So who we're going to include in the history of the left is the fucking slaves. How about that? But in a good way. So the slaves were known because where did they live? They lived in the South. And how has the South felt about guns historically, right? And that meant that slaves had access to guns. And when they were ex-slaves, they all did what? What was the first thing you did when you were an ex-slave? You got yourself a goddamn gun, or many, right? Because all of a sudden it's 1865 or 1866 and the Ku Klux Klan is forming and they're coming to burn your ass to the ground. So they all were strapped up. And they all fought back, by the way, which is a major part of what I'm going to call the American left, resistance to actual, here's the thing, guys, real white supremacy, not this phantom shit that they're talking about these days, but we're talking about dudes really in hoods, really burning down people's buildings and really shooting them in the head, right? And hanging them from trees. So yeah, Black armed resistance is a big story I'm going to tell. And very, very few people talk about that because of course, Black people have to be victims.
Yes.
Black people have to be, so they don't want to hear about this shit. Killer Mike of Run the Jewels, he flew me out to Atlanta he interviewed me on this very topic. He wanted to know about the history of Black armed resistance. So I did all this research for this very topic and I presented it to Mike, and hopefully the Intercept will someday publish that podcast. But so it's a topic near and dear to my heart that I think your audience will love. I know they will. So, and there's a whole lot more to the whole history of blacks and guns, which is just amazing. I've written about this for Reason Magazine too, if people want to check that out. So, and then we're going to finish with, we're going to do the Stonewall Riots, which to me, that's the Stonewall Riots, 1969. It's the most liberatory moment in American history. This is the freest moment. This is the greatest blow for freedom I've ever witnessed. And it wasn't just for gays. It was for all of us. So this was when a bunch of drag queens and fags in the Stonewall Inn in New York City rioted against the police when the police were coming to take them to jail for being fags. And they spent 2 nights smashing police car windows and setting fires in the streets and throwing rocks at the cops. And guess what happened? Right after that, the cops across the country, not just in New York, stopped raiding gay bars. Holy shit. Talk about a watershed moment if you're gay. I mean, can you imagine that? The only way you can get laid is to go to a gay bar. And when you do that, you know you have a 50% chance of going to jail that night and then having them publish your fucking name in the newspaper, which is what they did too. These fags and drag queens, the Stonewall Inn, put an end to that. Boom. Through what? Direct action and violence against who? The state. The state. So my side note, my political project for a long time, because I come from the left, we haven't gotten into that, but yeah, so I was born a socialist. My parents were socialists, Trotskyists, Marxists, hardcore revolutionary socialists. We can get into that. They chose to be working class people. My stepfather got a job in factories. My mother was a secretary when they were both like highly educated, upper middle class people, so they could organize the proletariat for revolution. So that was my damn world in Berkeley, California, which was in the 1960s and 70s when I was growing up here, full of hippies and commies and Black Panthers. Black Panthers are 4 blocks from us. The headquarters, the national headquarters. We had Black Panthers at our house giving talks. So I grew up in a mostly Black neighborhood on the Oakland, Berkeley border. So yeah, this is why this stuff is in my bones. Where was I? I was talking about something else. I was going somewhere with that. Stonewall Inn. Yes. So, people need to understand, and I mean people on the right need to understand how the people at Stonewall Inn are their people. It just gave rise to tremendous, well, not everybody on the right. I should take that back. I guess the libertarian right. This was the greatest blow against the worst form of state power. I mean, they would lock you up for having sexual feelings. I mean, this is disgusting. This is being a vice cop in the 1960s and 50s and 40s. Like, that's what that was. It was chasing gay guys down the street and putting them in fucking jail and then shaming them in public for it. I mean, what's worse than that, really? And these were the most hated people in society, right? The most despised. And they stood up and they literally fought the cops with their fists in the street. And they changed history. And they made all of us freer. And in all kinds of ways we'll talk about in the class. It wasn't just ending the police raids on gay bars. It was, they changed the way we think about gender and sexuality for everybody. It became okay to be, you didn't have to just be completely masculine or completely feminine, right? Gender became more fluid, and not in stupid ways that it is now, but it just was okay to like cross your legs if you were a guy, right, or to maybe have a short haircut if you're a woman. It just was really revolutionary for a lot of people. So those are the highlights. There's a lot more, but those are things that I think will surprise people at least.
It is simply remarkable. When I meditate with Headspace for just 10 minutes first thing in the morning, the rest of my day is simply better. And I use the techniques of Headspace throughout the day to be present, to be centered, to be in my body, to not be in the past or the future, but to be right here and right now. It feels as if the very chemistry of my body has changed. I feel more relaxed, more centered, more calm, more at ease. I sleep better, I have less anxiety, and I am present in the moment. And many scientific studies, believe it or not, have shown just this. Thousands of people have said that this is their experience too, with Headspace and other mindfulness meditations. So, to use the very same free 1-month trial that got me started on Headspace 7 years ago, go to headspace.com/renegade, and I guarantee you that your body, your mind, and your life will be better because of it. Again, go to headspace.com/renegade and let me know. Thank you.
Should we start with a working definition of leftism? Because there's so much gray area. There's people have their own definitions. They hear liberal. Now that means all kinds of different things than it used to mean. Even libertarian at this point means a lot of things that it did not used to mean. Leftism, progressivism, liberal, Democrats, obviously, throwing Democrats in, it kind of skews it even more than it should. But do you have a working definition of leftism that we should know for this class? And maybe know in general, because I always think of egalitarianism. You're saying some things in the last 5 minutes that actually are very positive in my mind that don't equal egalitarianism. So how do you define it? And what should we know about that?
The left is made up of people who, interesting. Well, the main difference is that the left is, as I said, they are hostile to the establishment. So, and the political establishment, meaning the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, obviously, but including it's the Bernie wing, and the Bernie wing is basically a hostile takeover, right? The Bernie wing. I mean, and the establishment Democrats have been trying to literally kill the Bernie wing for a long time, right? So that's a fundamental existential conflict, and that's why I call the Bernie people left, because they're really hostile to the establishment Democratic Party. They're radicals. They're not reformists. That's the difference. So the Stonewall Inn people, what they accomplished was radical, obviously. And the way they went about it was radical, and it was radically anti-establishment because it was radically anti-state. And then you have anarchists too, left-wing anarchists in the left tradition. So they're obviously anti-establishment. The difference between left-wing anarchists and your kinds of anarchists is that they wanted a collectivism. But here's the thing. Many of them, probably most of them, like the classic anarchists, we will talk about, I haven't mentioned them, like Emma Goldman and others, Sacco and Vanzetti, who were executed. They, for the most part, believed in a decentralized collectivism. Mm-hmm. So they believed in what we now call council communism, which means a collection of collectives. So, towns, and I'm not saying this is good, but it's not really a state, you know? And it's not that far from Rothbard's vision either, really. It's not that far, right? They want, the most decentralized power possible, and they want no state at all. So they want this industry to be run collectively, or better yet, the industry broken down into separate units, and then have each unit run collectively by the workers. And then they want towns and small towns to be run by the people who live there, which again is completely consistent with Ron Paul. I mean, the devolution of power from the federal level to the local level. Ron Paul didn't go farther than that. So it's interesting. I was going to say, sorry, my big overarching project politically for a long time now, now I remember what I was talking about, having come from the left and then being around libertarians a lot and being influenced by libertarians in the last 10 years, has been to bring the two together. So if you look at my writing for a reason, that's often what I do for them. I'm always trying to find the issue where leftists and libertarians will agree, like gun control is racist. There actually are some really smart leftists who know that, and they argue against gun control, and that's one of the reasons they do. Or what happened to the Stonewall Inn, or our common revulsion at parts of the American left, like the progressives and their heavy-handedness with war and the state and all that, and eugenics, right? So the left is mixed. There's conflict within it, and there are parts that don't really get along with each other. And I'm trying to shake it out a bit and say, some things don't really maybe belong here. Maybe we should divorce ourselves from things like the progressive movement, right?
Yes.
Leftists, right? Yeah, unless you want a whole lot of eugenics and war, So yeah.
And so to bring it now to kind of where things are at, and so my listeners kind of get some differences here. Let's talk about someone they'll know obvious. You've said AOC, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden. Of the left, progressives, this corporatist word gets thrown around a lot too, and that's what I would actually refer to them as. But how does that fit into something like progressivism? I actually think it fits quite well, but I'll let you talk.
Well, all those guys, Harris, Biden, who was the other one?
I said AOC. I'm not sure where she's
AOC.
at these days. She seems to change quite a bit, so I don't know.
Okay, so she's a little bit different. But so where Biden and Harris started was none of those. It was what's I call now the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, which is the establishment now, right? Which became ascendant in the 1990s with Clinton. So that's the Democratic Leadership Council, which is the conservative wing of the Democrats. They took over. They took over the party, and that's been the leadership of the party since then. That's who they are, and they are globalist managerial neoliberals. Okay. So they are interested in private property. They're interested in capital. They like capital, and hello, Goldman Sachs funds every one of their campaigns. So obviously, but they want a world of separate nation states, but they want to have Washington D.C. managing, not command and control, but managing the world economy and all the nation states. That's why they want to kill Russia. They want to kill Putin because they want to manage Russia, and Russia's not being managed. They're refusing to be managed by us. So that's where they started, and they weren't woke, obviously, because Joe Biden was proud of locking up, 1 million black people, and Kamala Harris locked up, probably not 1 million, but a lot. That's what she did for a living.
Yeah.
When you're the DA in San Francisco, there are no white criminals. Hello, like all the white people there are rich, and there's only a handful of black people who live there, and they're the poor ones. So what do you think? So that's all she did. That's all she did was lock up blackness. She didn't give a fuck about wokeness. Not only that, Kamala Harris, we know, comes from Indian Jamaicans, and Indian Jamaicans are famous. You can look it up. Famous for their anti-black racism. They're famous for it. They're hated in Jamaica by black people for that reason. Anyway, so they along comes 2020. The entire world has veered into woke leftness suddenly, right? I mean, within just a few years, all of a sudden woke is everything, and all these left-wing tropes from the past are prominent. And they know how to get their bread buttered. And so they're playing the game. I don't think they believe anything that they're saying.
Right.
But they are playing the game of the left now. AOC, this is slightly more interesting. She came from what the Clinton wing replaced, which was the Teddy Kennedy wing, which was dominant in the Democratic Party until the 1990s.
Yeah.
So basically a remnant of the New Deal. So that's what Teddy Kennedy, the Kennedy wing, that's what the Democratic Party was about until the 1990s. It was continuing what FDR and Truman were up to, which was having a very elaborate social welfare state, lots of heavy regulation, management of the economy, not direct control, although they're into that too when they feel like it. And then eternal empire, of course, in part to manage the world and to uplift the world with social welfare programs that we as Americans will direct from afar. So that's AOC. Worked for Teddy Kennedy. She started off out of college. She worked as an intern in Teddy Kennedy's office, and then but that's not too far from the current wokeness, right? From Teddy Kennedy, she went from Teddy Kennedy to Bernie, and then Bernie's been forced into this woke identity politics stuff, which is a different part of the left, right? There's this hostility, which we'll talk about a lot in the class, between the kind of old class Marxist left, which is Bernie Sanders, right? And the new identity politics woke left, which is more, I don't know, idiots like Cory Bush or whatever, but and they converge. Bernie was forced to speak, to talk that talk.
Right.
Yeah. So AOC is like a hybrid. She's a hybrid of the New Deal left, which is the Green New Deal, right? That's her thing. And the woke left, which is her nonstop blathering about white supremacy. She's managed to merge the two. Bernie does it very uneasily. He does it by force. He's obligated. He doesn't think that way. He's a class dude. He's a class and economics dude. Yep. Totally. He's a Marxist.
I sometimes wonder if people like AOC really feel this woke love that they purport to have, because it's really what I often see with progressives is a lot of the population who lean that way are looked at as idiot dupes, basically. And the people who want power can use these emotions like playing on wokeness and racism, and that's the new trend of the last couple of years, and use that to get these people to go to the polls and give the leaders more power. So I'm not sure that they, I know Bernie doesn't give a shit about this stuff because it's so obvious how uncomfortable he is talking about it. But then I see AOC too, and sometimes I think she's got someone brilliant writing for her and pushing her, because when she's on her own, she sounds like a fool, basically. But when she's tweeting and when she's speaking publicly, not just on her Instagram stories, it seems to me very calculated and almost scripted to an extent. So what do you think on the actual true intentions of general progressive voters versus the true intentions of progressive leaders?
I know. I think she's a true believer. Okay. I think Bernie Sanders is obviously a true believer. I mean, come on, he has been saying exactly the same thing since the 1970s.
I mean, playing on the race issue, for instance, because it seems to me that's an easy thing to play on to get more power. I don't think Hillary Clinton really cares about the race issue.
Right.
I don't think, as we just discussed, Kamala Harris cares much about it, but a lot of voters do. So you can get more power doing it.
So that's what I was saying. I was drawing the distinction between Biden and Harris with AOC. So Biden and Harris have established themselves. It's very clear. They're opportunists. Okay. They don't give a shit, right? Because they went from being Clintonites to Bernieites. That doesn't work unless you totally sell out, right? AOC, I'm saying the transition from being a Teddy Kennedy person to a Bernie Sanders person to a woke identity person that's not a leap. And she managed to merge those two, and I think it works for her. It's coherent, basically. So so I think she's a true believer. I think Harris and Biden would love to lock up more Black people because that's what they spent their lives doing. Hello, leftists, what the hell? Why did you want me to vote for them? I still, to this day, I don't understand that. But the establishment Democrats are like amazingly corrupt if you think about it. Yeah. Like they're amazingly corrupt. I mean, they're behind all the shit. So the Bernie wing, because they're not dominant, they haven't pulled any of these shenanigans. Yeah, they participated in Russiagate, but they didn't run it. That wasn't their thing. I mean, Clinton literally paid for the damn thing. She literally paid for the Steele dossier. I mean, and then Podesta and all the rest of them. It was the Clinton wing that was totally responsible for that. So they're crooks. I mean, they're truly corrupt. I mean, this is like amazingly corrupt. And then what they've done with COVID and the completely inconsistent, even if you give them the benefit of the doubt, like completely inconsistent, their positions on COVID and what should be done. And we have how many 500 political prisoners now?
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about that more? I know, I'm so sorry they're like redneck Trump people and I'm not supposed to care about them, but these are political prisoners.
Yeah.
And they've been put there again by the Clinton wing, the establishment wing of the Democratic Party. We got political prisoners, Buck.
Yeah.
There's no fucking way all 500 of those people are anything close to domestic terrorists.
Right.
I don't think any of them are, but I mean, are we afraid of them? Really? Are we really afraid of them? It's just, and what they've done, what the establishment wing of the Democratic Party has done to the psyche of this country through the suppression of information and the hyping of fear, like crazy.
Yes.
Like the fear mongering is off the charts. It's always been bad, but like you got most people think they're going to die of COVID.
Yeah.
It's like, what? And it's like, yeah, I don't watch the news, or like they passively take in CNN a few minutes a day and that's all they need because everybody's brainwashed by this.
Yep.
By this monster, this machine. But then again, these leftists are true believers. This is the difference between the left and liberals.
Okay. Yes.
Leftists, for better and worse, right? It's kind of religious, but sometimes the religion's good, just like Christianity. Christians are really wonderful people, but the rest of the philosophy, I don't know. I mean, so. Yeah, the leftists are true believers. That's another thing that distinguishes them. There's nobody in the class who I will call a leftist who wasn't a true believer.
Okay.
John Brown literally died for the cause. The guy was a psycho. He was a homicidal psycho, and a racist, by the way, which we'll talk about, which no one knows about. But he clearly believed in this thing all the way down in his bones. Abolishing slavery really was his life's mission. Eugene Debs, of course, was, come on, lots of people on the left died. Lots of people on the left died for the cause. This is a tradition also on the left. Zealotry is a big thing on the left, and they love their martyrs. Yeah. Joe Hill was an organizer for the Industrial Workers of the World, which was a big sort of anarcho-communist labor union back in the early 20th century. And he was hanged from a railroad trestle, and they just love talking about Joe Hill. There's songs about Joe Hill. There's movies about Joe Hill. There's like t-shirts with Joe Hill. They just love them a martyr, right? That's a big part of the tradition too.
Let's talk about the long march through the institutions. I assume that will be discussed in the class. And because I want my people listening to think about this, and I realize a lot of you understand it already, but if you don't, in these terms, the left pretty much runs everything in this country, as far as every cultural and any institution
except Fox News. Fox News is the only thing.
News, right?
That's it. Though. That's the only thing.
Everything else, universities, at this point, the military-industrial complex, any type of cultural entertainment centers run by them, and as Thad knows, and my listeners know from this show last week, also a lot of the entertainment industry run by China. That's a different story. But the left had a brilliant parts of the left had a brilliant incremental plan, something called the Long March Through the Institutions. It's clearly worked. Can we talk about that a little bit? And I assume that will be covered.
Indeed. Yes, this is how they took over the cultural institutions, was by entering the Long March Through the Institutions. Really begins with the academy, begins with universities and colleges, which was I wouldn't say concerted effort, although there was some explicit talk about this. It begins in the 1960s. So in the 1960s, you have this big efflorescence of left-wing movements, of course. You've got civil rights movement, Black radicalism, Malcolm X, Stonewall, feminism, big anti-war movement. Socialism is cool again. This is the last time that socialism was talked about, by the way. Although not as much now. I mean, not as much then it is now, by the way, but it was talked about. So you have all these radicals, all these lefty radicals who were in their 20s, in the 1960s. And they look around and they realize that, oh, well, the left is pretty big right now, but most of America still just is pretty damn conservative. Like they like to sit in their house in the suburbs with their wife and kids and watch football and go fuck yourself, hippie.
Yes.
And we hate communists, by the way. and we love our American flag. So the left got really all big and within America. And we're going to do that in the one place where we can, which is the colleges and the universities. Because we're all intellectuals, we read books. That's how we became leftists. By the way, this is another thing about the left, right? You have to be an intellectual to be a leftist, pretty much. I mean, to be a real leftist. It's all theory. It's not about real people. It's all theory. Socialism is a theory, it's never really existed because it can't exist, because it doesn't fucking work in all sorts of ways. Cuba's not socialism. It's not. It's a dictatorship. It's no different than fascism. It's not social. It's not what socialists ever called for. It's true, but my point to them is, it's because it doesn't work, because the Cuban people refuse to work for the government the way that you want them to. Anyway, so they went into the academy. They got jobs as professors. They went to grad school and then got PhDs and then got jobs as professors. And they focused on the humanities and social sciences, which is where the state apparatus people come from. So they knew that it'd be training the leaders of the country, not to mention not just state people, but not just government officials, but business leaders and the elite, the cultural elite too. Yeah. They send their kids to those colleges. So you literally cannot go to any of the elite, I'm talking about top 300 colleges in this country. You can't go to any of them without hearing about every left-wing movement ever. You will definitely hear major left-wing radical arguments at every single college. So that means, think about it, right? Every congressperson went through one of those schools. Pretty much every one of them, right? Pretty much every business leader went through one of those schools. Pretty much everyone who runs a Hollywood studio went through one of those schools. Everybody in the music industry who's a top executive went through one of those schools. They went through the hands of these radical leftists from the 1960s and then their descendants, right? It's a hell of a move, man. It was a power move, and it was so smart. And now they are reaping the rewards because AOC went to one of those schools, and she's obviously a product of that. When I watch AOC, you know, she's exactly the age of a lot of my students back when I was teaching at Barnard College in Columbia. She's like an exact replica of all of them. Like I know that girl. You know, and she's just reading from that script, but it's written in the college classroom. So that's all they needed, really. They got to train a whole generation of people who are the elite now, the ruling class. They're now the ruling class. They run CNN.
Yeah.
We're done. We're toast.
They're now the establishment that I think the left was supposed to be against.
That's right. And now the left is dealing with that. They're dealing with the fact that they're now the establishment. So what do we do now that we run the place, which has always been the left-wing problem, right? Because they always want to run the place, but whenever they do run the place, it falls apart. Every time. Mm-hmm. Here and elsewhere, it always falls apart. The New Deal, have you noticed? It fell apart. That was a left-wing project for a while. That fell apart, right? Yeah. So not just Cuba and North Korea and the Soviet Union and East Germany, those places, they obviously fell apart. But I'm talking about left-wing projects here have always fallen apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We got to talk about a name before I get you out of here. Herbert Marcuse, because you and I were hanging out here in Lockhart one evening. We'll talk about Lockhart here at the end of the show too. We were hanging out and somehow I brought his name up and you really got emotional and you said, "Oh my God, he's the guy that's the cause of all of the bullshit that we're dealing with right now. He is the guy that started it all." So I know he's going to be covered in the class. And in studying for this interview, I read his essay on repression, and you're right.
Yeah.
Repressive tolerance, I think it was called.
Yes.
Let's talk about him, what he represents, and what you want people to understand about him and why he is so important.
Oh my God. Yeah. So Marcuse, first of all, it is indisputable. It's not controversial. Everyone agrees on this who knows anything about it. He is the most influential intellectual for the current American left. His ideas are in pretty much all left-wing discourse now in some place or another. So Herbert Marcuse was a Jewish Marxist. I'm throwing in Jewish because it actually matters. Jewish Marxist German, living before World War II, came of age before World War II, and of course had to leave Germany because of the Holocaust thing, the Nazi thing. And he came to the United States, and he was an intellectual and a professor and smart guy and a good writer. So he got a job to support himself working for the OSS, which doing basically analysis of German culture for the OSS, which became the CIA. And his job was to do this analysis to show the ways in which the United States government could change German culture. The psychology, this is what was said, the psychology of Germans when they won the war. Because when they won the war, they knew that they were going to colonize Germany with all sorts of schools run by Americans, teaching what Americans wanted them to teach, and not to mention holding them hostage by saying, okay, we're going to defend you from Stalin and the Soviets with all of our guns, but you're going to have to be very compliant with us in exchange for that. So that was Marcuse's job, was to tell the CIA, the federal government, the weaknesses in German culture and what should be reformed and changed and how they should be changed to make them more American. Holy crap. And of course, this is all what happened after World War II. It's exactly what the United States did. They went in and they moved in and they took control of the schools and the rest of it. it's amazing. This guy started out as an arch imperialist for Uncle Sam. And just a few years later, he wrote One Dimensional Man, which is his classic book, which calls for a general strike across the world to usher in this new collectivist paradise utopia. He doesn't spell out what that utopia is, but then you get a better sense of that many years later when he writes Repressive Tolerance, the essay you're talking about, in which he says straight up, you know what we need? He says, no, there's a problem here. There's a problem in our country, in our society, which is that a lot of people think bad things. They think a lot of bad things. They have bad ideas about like capitalism. They're for capitalism. They like capital. It's bad. And so, especially capitalism, that's what he really hates the most. But here's the thing they hate the most, that he and the Frankfurt School thinkers, he's a part of that, hated the most about capitalism. Consumerism. Think about that. That's what bothered them the most, was that people were buying things that they liked, and that they liked buying those things. They hated that. So they wanted everyone to get rid of all the materialism and all their consumer goods and all the comforts that modern capitalism had given us after living like pigs for millennia. And in Repressive Tolerance, he says these pro-capitalist ideas that Americans like so much, we need to not allow that. We need to not allow people to say things that are pro-capitalist. And we're going to have to lock people up and censor them with the government if they say things that are pro-capitalist. This is actually what this fucking essay says. So it is written at the time that Maoism is ascendant in China, by the way. This is very important. Marcuse was heavily influenced by Mao and Maoism. You know, mass censorship, which relies on cultural shaming. Right, that was a big thing in Maoist China, was shaming people, especially who? Capitalists.
Mm-hmm.
They would take capitalists out of their offices, strip off their clothes, put dunce hats on them, make them march down the street, and people would pelt them with eggs. That's what happened in Maoist China. That's exactly what Herbert Marcuse and the Frankfurt School and a lot of the new left of the 1960s wanted, and it's clearly what a lot of the left now not only wants, but is what? Doing. That's what they're literally doing. They're literally throwing things at people. They're literally punching them in the face. They are shaming them every second they can. They're locking them up. They're locking them up for having bad ideas. Those 500 political prisoners,
yeah,
they're there because they're Trump supporters, and we know that.
Right.
My goodness gracious, man. They're not a threat to anybody. So yeah, this is the man, Herbert Marcuse. If you want to go to the source, he's the one. He's the one.
One of the other interesting quotes I read about him, and this is something I personally always associate with progressives, is their lust for war, and usually in order to spread their own ideas. And one of the quotes I read about him in one of the organizations, I don't know if it was OSS or something that he was part of, it said, part of the theoretical brain trust of the American war machine.
Yeah. It's the history of the left has a lot of contradictions in it. The ones, again, I'm going to focus on in the class are the ones I consider to be more clear-headed. Some elements of the left have gotten confused about war in particular. Mm-hmm. So like progressives, maybe not confused. I mean, this is the thing. Here's the fundamental problem with the left regarding war, Buck Johnson. They are in my view, the American left has always been a fundamentally Christian movement. Without God, without the metaphysics.
Yep.
But the morality is essentially the same. It is you sacrifice yourself, your pleasure, your freedom for the God's community, for the greater good, for the community. So, okay. And you're also morally obligated, just like Christians are, to uplift your neighbor, to be your brother's keeper, right? To go save people, to go help people. Very Christian idea. That's the left. Okay. So where they started was abolitionism, as I said earlier, which was, there's those people over there who were oppressed. Well, we need to go raise them up. So we need to kill 600,000 people to do that. But they did. And then progressivism comes along and they're like, oh, wait, we've got poor people in the ghettos in our cities. Well, we need to go fix that. And so, they established settlement houses where they trained immigrants to speak American and do the right thing and act properly. And Black people too. They did the same thing with Black people. And then World War I comes along in 1914 in Europe, and they look over at Europe and they say, wait a minute. It is our mission to uplift the oppressed. Well, the Kaiser is obviously oppressing the German people, and he's threatening to oppress the rest of Europe. Well, Jesus Christ, guys, like the same logic that applies to us going into the ghetto and saving them with welfare applies here to international relations. We need to go save the Germans and the French. So strap up, get in the boat, let's go to war. That's exactly what they said. And then they said the same thing in World War II. And they said the same thing with Korea. And they said the same thing, yes, they did, with Vietnam. You know what LBJ said about about Vietnam? He said, we want to bring the New Deal to the Mekong Delta.
Yeah.
So, that's a leftist project. Napoleon was the original leftist, by the way. He took Rousseau's ideas and went wild, and he went worldwide with it. He conquered the whole world, basically, and brought the French Revolution everywhere. Egalitarianism, he brought it everywhere. The Napoleonic Code, right? That's in Haiti still to this day because of what he did, right? And by killing a lot of people, by imperialism. Is the left wing inherently imperialistic is a question we are going to address in the course.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I almost feel like when I have these discussions, it comes down to being black and white in your word definitions, because I guess I would probably typically say the left is inherently pro-war. But then if I start thinking about some of the original movements and some of the stuff in your area in the 60s, the people protesting the Vietnam War, clearly many of them were of the left. So gets into this, it's almost like some people have said Trumpers are better than Trump himself. I don't know, maybe a lot of the left voters are better than the left leaders. I don't know. Well, see, that's why I have to take this class, because we need these discussions.
Well, hang on now. So about Vietnam, yes, it's true. A lot of leftists opposed the Vietnam War. Sorry, they opposed the United States war against the communist regime in Vietnam. Guess what they were very much for? They were very much for the communist war against South Vietnam.
Right.
Very much for that. They were very much for the communist war of aggression, of imperialist aggression on Vietnam. They love them some more, man. When it's in the right, it's for the right cause, though. That's all. It just needs to be for the right cause.
Critical theory. We're going to talk about that in this class.
Yeah,
that's the new hot topic, especially critical race theory. I know that gets a lot. It almost sounds boomery to bring that particular topic up. Is that coming up in this class? Is there anything we should know?
Boomery. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Well, so for me, again, like you guys, people watching may have noticed, like I have maybe unpredictable views on the left. Sometimes I like the left, sometimes I hate the left, right? CRT is both good and bad in that the original ideas of CRT were that ideas or even just feelings about race and gender inform the ways we think about the world and inform some of the actions that we take. And so they started to look at texts or laws, especially came out of law schools, in which there's no explicit mention of race or gender, but you can see that like the lawmaker was thinking about race and gender in particular ways that went into making this law. So I thought that was actually really valuable and important insight, and it's informed all of my work. So Renegade History does a lot of that, right? I see race and gender where people don't. You don't have to agree with it. Maybe we're full of shit when we see that, but I think it's pretty solid interpretation that American culture has been organized around ideas and feelings about race and gender. I mean, come on. I mean, so doesn't mean it's bad, but we certainly have done that. So to look for it in places where it's not obvious seems like the right move to make. Now, that's the original idea. That's Kimberly Crenshaw back in the day, back in the 1980s, 90s. Okay. Now, what's happened with it, like all things seemingly, is that they've taken that really lovely idea and made it into a caricature, so that instead of saying there are laws, not all laws, there are some laws that are influenced by, the way I put it, by ideas about race. Now they say racism is everything, is everywhere, it's all the time. The way that you're looking at me, Buck, right now is racist. Everything is racist. And they use it, most importantly, as a cudgel. They use it to punish people. It's an act of sadism, because there's no, they're not interested in a positive end result. They're not you may have noticed BLM never really talks about where they want to go, what they want to do, except defund the police. Well, you got to replace the fucking police with something, guys.
Yeah.
Hello. Why do you not mention that ever? Nothing. Just defund the police, which I'm all for. But if we replace them with something, so yeah, that's a problem, because they're just sadists, I think, and they're using racism as this weapon, and it's not just against white people anymore; it's against everybody, and it becomes this obsessive thing. Once you get this idea that maybe race and racism are subterranean, which is the original CRT idea, which I think is correct, by the way. You get paranoid. This is my friend Camille Foster talks about the paranoia in the black mind. James Baldwin. Camille got it from James Baldwin and talked about paranoia in the black mind, where you see, because we live in a racist society, and certainly did during James Baldwin's time. But it's totally understandable for black people to be paranoid, right? That they're, back in the 1950s, assuming that white people are racist, because most of them were, right? But now it's just not the case. It's just not the case. Certainly not the way that they were in the 1950s, but they act like it's still the 1950s, that white people are exactly the way they were in the South in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Anytime I hear Biden or these elected representatives bring up racism, they can't give anything recent. It's always, this is like Jim Crow. They skip over decades and decades with no examples of what this is like.
Exactly.
Let's talk about Renegade University. This class you got, of course. Talk about how the people can sign up and just broadly what you're doing with Renegade University, because I think it's amazing. We're and just a quick aside of my own, there's a lot of black-pilled feeling from people lately. It feels like the noose is tightening just a bit with things like vaccine passports and in this kind of dystopian future we keep seeing quicker and quicker and quicker. It's not incremental anymore. And there's often people going, what do we do? How can we form our own communities? We just want to be left alone, get out of this matrix. And so I say that because I think that organizations or functions or things like Renegade University are kind of a way to escape from the established matrix that we're trying to kind of move out of. So I think
totally.
Yeah.
I love that you see that in RU, because I've always seen that it's a community. It's an alternative community. That's very much what it is. It's a place to hash out ideas. It's a place to learn things, but it is also very much community. And that's what it's been for 4 years. We now have 1,000 members, and people have formed their own bonds with each other in RU. And there's all sorts of, we have meetups, we have organizations, we have groups that meet all over the country around RU as RU members. We see each other every Thursday night at Unregistered Live. We see each other in classes, and a lot of friendships have developed, and people have a real sense of community. Oh, and Thursday nights, you've done this, I think. When I leave, I'm there for like an hour and a half, and then I turn it off, and everybody stays, and they stay until late in the night. It's fantastic. So we have a men's group, a men's support group. We're gonna have a women's support group really soon, and people love it. And I'm not even part of that. That's totally spontaneous, happened within RU by RU members. So beautiful. I love it. And the men in that group talk about all the time how important it is to them. They can't live without it, they tell me. And I've never even been to a session. I don't even know what it's like, but I hear from a lot of people. So that's community. That's alternative community, right? That's amazing what we're doing. And it's just happening on its own. So, and then we have in-person events like the one at your place in October 8th to the 10th. I mean, it's just the craziest lineup ever. I couldn't believe that we got these people. But we got Scott Horton, Hotep Jesus, Cody Wilson, Jack the Perfume Nationalist, Deirdre McCluskey, and Buck Johnson, all in the same place at the same time, hanging out and eating barbecue and doing whatever we fucking want, because we're going to be free. And that's what RU is about. It's about freedom. It's about saying what you want to say, being who you want to be, not being judged, not being shamed, certainly never being censored, unless you do some ad hominem stuff, but people don't do that. People are nice, So, but yeah, it's freedom is here, man. We're coming out of the lockdown, and now's the time to find each other and get together and make life beautiful again. So RU is very much about that.
All right. How do they sign up for the class? What dates is this class? Talk about that.
What dates? I don't even
know. Look it up. See, I caught you flat-footed.
It's 2 weeks. I think it's 2 weeks from yesterday. So it's like late August. But go to renegadeuniversity.com/courses, and you'll see all of our courses. History of the American Left will be at the top of the page. You'll see it right there. The course that Buck was talking about, Conservatism with Daniel McCarthy, that's now a streaming video course. That is stupendous.
Yes.
Buck can speak to that. I mean, I love that course. 5 sessions. And boy, did Dan he went so deep. History of conservatism. I mean, we are all semi-experts now after having taken that course. It was amazing. We got that. We got another course that I know your listeners will be totally into, which is James Corbett. I'm sure there's James Corbett fans.
Yes.
We got James Corbett to teach for us. He's now RU faculty. So proud of this. So he's teaching the history of the mass media in November. And you'll see that at the top of the page, renegadeuniversity.com/courses. You'll see it right there. Get that. That's going to be ridiculous. And we're going to have him teach a lot more, I hope. And then we have Daniel Coffeen teaching our postmodern stuff, doing Deleuze and Guattari, which was a very highly requested course. So Daniel's going to do that for us. And we've already got a bunch of people signed up for it. Daniel's just a wonderful teacher and a guy, and just a really fantastic intellectual, super fun and funny. And he's also completely brilliant. So we've got a bunch happening, and people should come to RU Texas, October 8th to the 10th.
Yeah.
Go to renegadeuniversity.com/Texas for that. Oop.
Yes. And I'll even put a special link for tickets to that event in the show notes page for this episode. Thad, where can they find you on social media to see your tweets and all of the good stuff that you do there?
At Thaddeus Russell. It's pretty easy.
That's
on Twitter.
Pretty damn easy. All right, yep. Thad, my friend, thank you so much for being here. And you guys, the class is going to be good. Thanks.
Yeah, man. Thanks, brother.
Yes, sir.
This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To join the new Renegade University, go to renegadeuniversity.com. To join the new Unregistered Underground, the supporting listeners group for the podcast, go to unregisteredunderground.com. Thanks for listening.